Welcome to the Introverted Doctor podcast, the podcast that uncovers myths, mistakes, and misconceptions that holds healthcare professionals back from living their best life at work, home, and play. I'm Dr. Lalit Chawla, and with each episode, I'll be focusing on different aspects such as communication techniques, mindset, routines, tools, and strategies, with the goal to show how to eliminate anxiety, trip-ups, and unwelcome results that come from ineffective communications. Now, in the last episode, I said I was going to share with you the 4D planner, but I wanted to actually share the content in this episode because I think it leads a bit better to that. So if you were expecting that, I apologize. But in this week's episode, I want to share an encounter I had with a disgusting patient and the outcome of that. But before I dive into that story, I want to share with you a little something that only a few people know about me. And it also answers part of the question I get asked a lot of times about how did you become a magician? Okay. So today I'll give you the short version of that story. Now I actually grew up after age 14 in a small rural village, New Sarepta, Alberta. The population was about 300 people. And we were the only East Indian family, not to mention the only visible minority for miles and miles around. So anyway, I was basically your standard science and math person. I never really had any hobbies other than playing sports. And as life would have it, I met a magician, Keith Lewis, in this little village, and we ended up becoming friends. And he ended up teaching me magic tricks, and I developed a real passion for magic. Now, I learned how to perform small tricks and then ended up wanting to do bigger illusions and Houdini escapes. And Keith at that time was about 33 years old, married with 2 little kids. And he was, and still is, an exceptional creator, visionary, and teacher. So anyway, how it worked was that I really liked performing, and so did he, but he was more of a builder and creator overall. He would build the illusions, and I learned through watching and talking and hanging out with him and learned how his brain worked, but I was basically performing. So anyway, life was great. We had a kind of an unspoken arrangement. I performed illusions and shows, and he would just build them. I started to take performing really seriously and then decided while doing my pre-medical degree that I no longer wanted to be a doctor, but would become a professional illusionist because I was having some, really early successes, and it was so much fun doing magic. Now, the important part of the story I want to share with you is that Keith and I got along great, except for this one time where we had a real conflict and where things went really sour. Here's the critical part. While I was perfecting the skill of performing and entertaining, I lacked one very important ability. I didn't know how to build new illusions. I was very dependent on Keith to build them for me. Now, while we worked great together on the ideas, the mechanical aspect of physically putting them together was his responsibility. I didn't think it was necessary to really learn how to build them. After all, that's what Keith Lewis was for, right? Yeah, right. So anyway, in light of this, our partnership made sense. I didn't know how to use power tools. I never constructed anything in my life, while Keith was very good with that kind of stuff. I believe building something with my hands simply wasn't within me. It was a skill I couldn't learn, and my life experience supported this. I had a firm, fixed belief, which is really the definition of a delusion. I believed I was a performer, not a builder, and I was about to learn a hard lesson from Keith. The surprise and unintentional lesson started when I asked him to build a new illusion I had thought up. I explained it to him, and he simply said, "No, I can't build it for you," which really shocked me. This was the first time he had ever said no. The dialogue is clear to me today as it was back in 1989. And he said to me, you can build the illusion yourself. You know what to do. I don't have time to do it. And then I responded, I can't. I don't know how to build this kind of stuff. I never used power tools. I'm East Indian. We don't know how to use power tools. My dad didn't know how to use tools. I don't know how to, what the heck? And he replied, well, that's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard you say this week. You can learn how to do it, just like how I learned. Do you think I was born with this ability? No, I had to learn through trial and error. I cut the wood too short too many times. I spent plenty of time and money. But eventually I learned to figure out everyone learns by mistakes. You can do it too. And he said, remember this, what one person can do, so can another. Now, this was something I had heard him say before, but I never really believed him. I thought it was some rah-rah motivational crap that he saw on some billboard. And we argued back and forth, and I left his place angry, believing really that he wasn't going to help me and was unwilling to help me. I mean, I couldn't understand why he was behaving this way. I thought our friendship was over. I just couldn't identify with what Keith was saying, and I couldn't identify with the idea of learning a new skill, especially as complicated as using a skill saw, table saw, and other power tools. I just didn't think that simply reframing my idea of who I could be would change anything and what I could do. Ironically, after that argument and my deep desire to build a shadow box, I was more determined than ever to create this new illusion. I remember thinking, I'll show him I can do this without him, even if he doesn't want to help me. And I was unjustifiably angry at him, even refusing to take his phone calls. Now, fortunately, my self-image was linked to the idea that I saw myself as a resourceful guy and that I didn't give up easily. I remember thinking, I'll figure a way to create this new illusion, even if I have to resort to hiring somebody else to do it. In other words, I wanted the end result, the illusion, so badly that I'd find a way to achieve it. Now, this wasn't easy in a time when there was no internet services available. There was no such thing as how-to videos that exist today. There was no YouTube. I relied upon my imagination, a few tools I borrowed from my neighbor, and a couple of carpentry books, not to mention the fact that I had little to no money and was borrowing that from my mom. Well, actually, she gave it to me. And we're in this tiny little village in New Sarepta. So our disagreement had created a shift in my focus. I began to think that perhaps I could figure this out on my own or get help from somebody. Now, after several weeks and plenty of sweat and tears and broken drill bits and saw blades, I had built about 70% of the illusion. When my ego had simmered, I realized the lesson I'd inadvertently learned in the process, the lesson Keith had taught me, intentionally or otherwise, was that if you define your identity by what you can't do, you will never discover a greater identity based on what you can do. And when I changed the way I saw myself, I changed the possibilities of what I could do. I apologized to Keith, and together we completed the last 30% of the illusion with fewer broken drill bits and saw blades. And from that moment on, my identity had changed from believing I couldn't build illusions to knowing that I could. I was now a builder of illusions. And that new identity destroyed my delusion that I was incapable of learning a new skill, such as carpentry. Now, reflecting on these experiences of building a career in magic, I realize how my self-identity has been shaped by my role models, the reputation and positive accolades from my magical performances, and overall the psychological barrier, to using carpentry tools. I've learned that the way in which we view ourselves is the greatest shaper of our thoughts, emotions, and decisions, which ultimately reflects our outcomes and life trajectory. Self-perception, good, bad, or indifferent, influences everything we do, from building illusions to studying for medical school exams. It affects any new endeavor we pursue. Our interactions, our relationships, our habits, our traits, or our outcomes or desires or needs is all influenced by who we think we are. If we believe we're a caring spouse, we become a caring spouse. If we believe we can't be good parents, we find ways to validate that belief. If we believe we can learn to be good or great or amazing at whatever it is, you become that. Now, my personal belief is that as individuals, we are constantly evolving and learning different things about ourselves, different experiences, and how we interpret them influences our identity. But what key influencers shapes identity? Just as important, how does one change one's identity? The disgusting patient who came into my office helped me uncover part of that answer. Now let me tell you about that disgusting patient. A medical student and I were reviewing an x-ray with a young, healthy, middle-aged patient. The patient had been told by the emergency room physician the previous week that the x-ray was normal. She wanted to review the results again, despite not having any respiratory symptoms or risk factors for lung disease, such as smoking or exposure to toxins. My impression was that she tended to perseverate over things that perhaps many people would not have, such as a normal chest x-ray with no clinical signs or symptoms of concern. However, I must, always remember to be mindful to not let my biases cloud my judgment when seeing a patient, because there may be some other things that are happening. So anyway, this clinical encounter started off uneventfully with me asking a few basic questions about her breathing and concerns. After a complete history and a focused physical, I reassured her that she looked well and that indeed the chest x-ray she had 1 week ago was normal and there was nothing to really worry about. As she was getting up, she said to us, "You know me, I'm a worrywart." And I didn't really respond to that comment, hoping it was more rhetorical in nature. Plus, I was running a bit behind with other patients and in the clinic. And it seemed clear that everything that needed to be addressed in that clinical visit had been. So I got up to let her out of the office. And as I was turning the door handle, I asked a rhetorical question. "So how's everything else going?" And she said, "Oh, Dr. Chawla, I'm so disgusting. I haven't changed much at all. I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to control the junk food I eat, but I can't. I'm so disgusted with myself. I'm simply disgusting." I paused, and unable to let that comment go unanswered, I quietly shut the door and said, "No, you're not disgusting," and sat back in my chair, and I invited her to sit back down. And I discussed with her how important language is in shaping our thoughts, behaviors, and self-image. When someone says she's disgusting, she essentially does what a disgusting person would do. She eats disgusting food and behaves in a disgusting manner. She won't exercise or pay attention to what's healthy for her. Disgusting thoughts begets disgusting behavior. Everything starts with a thought. A thought gets translated into words, which shapes emotions and manifests in behavior. Negative language shapes negative behaviors. Positive language shapes positive behaviors. Language is an incredibly important vehicle that directs us to achieve the life we want. Small things, as trivial as they may seem, can make a significant difference. Similarly, to how a small shift in the earth ultimately produces a tsunami. That's how important small changes are. So I reiterated that someone who sees herself as disgusting is essentially programming her self-identity. In telling others she's disgusting, she reinforces the belief and helps solidify the new personality that revolves around it. She's feeding her own self-image. What you feed is what you grow. So I asked her, what would be 3 words that would describe your best self? She, like many people, even high performers that are achieving well in life, said, she couldn't think of anything. Too many people see the negative in themselves and in their thinking, and they have trouble finding the positive. People are more self-critical of themselves more than they ever would be of anyone else. But let me get back to what I was saying. I ended up asking her, what would other people then say about you? And then she, after some thought, said, they would describe me as loyal, loving, and disciplined. So then I asked her if she could do one simple exercise, 3 minutes every morning and evening for at least 1 month. And she said she would. So I asked her, look at yourself in the mirror and imagine you see a little 5-year-old girl. And it is your young self. And I want you to say to that 5-year-old girl, which is you, that you're loyal, loving, and disciplined. And then I want you to see that little girl growing up before your very eyes to the woman that you are today. And I want you to say it with full intention, with full passion, and not just fluff it off like, I'm loyal, loving, disciplined. Put some energy into it. And so she said she could do this. So anyway, she left, and that was the end of the visit. She thanked me for our conversation. Several months later, she saw me in the grocery store, and she came running up to me, and she was so excited. She said to me, I got to tell you, that silly exercise you told me to do? And I thought, it wasn't really that silly. But anyways, I was kind of smiling, and I said, yeah, I remember that. She said, I lost 15 pounds simply by saying that. For some reason, it just changed the way I was thinking, and it made me have better language, which essentially actually changed her identity. Now, as a doctor, educator, and parent, I've seen how a person's belief about themselves affects their actions. When an individual believes he can't learn or do something, more often than not, he inevitably creates that result. I've also seen the opposite. When someone doesn't appear to be ready to complete something, whether performing a medical procedure, learning a new concept, or riding a bike without training wheels, but simply believes he can, because that's who I am, then he figures a way to accomplish it. Our self-identity is the eyes with which we see the world and interpret the events in that world. Our self-identity shapes the questions we ask, cultivates the answers we seek, and nurtures the needs on which we will focus on. Our self-identity is the greatest influencer in guiding our actions in what we do. If someone told me, said to me, hey, Lalit, you're a lousy basketball player, I wouldn't take any offense because I know I'm not good. However, if somebody said I'm a lousy husband or a terrible coach, now that would sting because I take pride in being a good husband, good dad, good coach. So think about what areas in your life limits you in the work that you do, the relationships you have, and the goals you want to achieve. Is there language you use that is affecting your ability to be more present and relate better with people, connect better, be healthier? Do you feel that you can't be more fit, be a better communicator? Why not? What 3 words could you use to be better at the work you do and the people you connect with, and a habit or discipline that you need to add so that you can meet your goals and aspirations this year? Think about your identity in three areas of your life: work, home, and play. If you're, an introvert, and that's great. But if you want to be more passion as an introvert, you can. I'm not asking you to change who you are, but to dial into your internal greatness that already exists there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this podcast served you in some way. And if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please share it with a friend, colleague, or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And if you go to the introverteddoctor.com and sign in there, you'll get my weekly emails about the podcast episodes that's coming out. And just a note, I've changed the release date to every Friday. I'm Dr. Lalit Chawla, and thank you so much for listening. Let's together make a greater, more effective community in 2020 so that you live with greater passion, harmony, and magic in your life and help others do the same. Have a super weekend.